So before we pop into the account page, I actually want to take a step back and just recognize that we've covered capturing and storing information. So we've worked with a lot of different types of data that we're storing into the database through our forms on our pages. So we won't really go over too much more on types of information that we can capture. You have the basics down now. So then we've also talked a bit about controlling the interface, specifically around showing and hiding elements. So we started with just hiding things on page load by marking them not visible on page load, and then showing them, so taking elements that are not shown on page load, like a pop-up, and using the show action to show it in the workflows, and then using conditions only. So we did the conditions only when we set the page width for the button on the home page to show when it was greater than 800 pixels page width or less than 800 pixels page width. And then also we've done a combination of workflows and conditions. So specifically, we've used the URL to store a little bit of information in the paths, and that information has been handed over into conditions to hide and show the different groups on the login page. So we're going to cover more ways of doing that. In fact, in this section, we're going to cover how to do that through URL parameters instead of page paths. But we're going to take a detour from our template and actually go into just a design primer on controlling the interface. So we're using a design template to make things easier. That way we don't have to worry too much about it, but it is going to be really important for you to be able to tweak things, even if you are using a template or have a designer creating your design for you. So I'm going to open this up and we'll talk a little bit about setting up a user portal with sections, and specifically about page and group divisions, going from big picture to smaller picture, and then using the URL parameters to make changes to the interface. So just to give you a picture of what we're going after, I used Google Drawings to just draw out the layout here. So you can see the layout starts with the big square here. And then within the square, we have some other rectangles happening. So we've got a header here with a logo and a picture. This is a very common layout for the header. Then we have a side portal here on the left-hand side with 3 tabs. And then we have a main section here next to the sidebar that contains groups here that correlate with our tabs. And what we really want to do is we want to make group tab 1 only show when tab 1 is selected. So that's what we're going after. So to start, I'm just going to create a new page in Bubble called Design Primer. And just a caveat, I will be the first person to tell you I am not a designer. I have great people on my team, like Michael, who created the template. They do a lot with design. I focus most of my time and energy on the logic behind when a user does this is what I want the app to do. But it is really important for us to get a handle on how we can make the interface do what we want, even if we're not designers and implementing design. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on this responsive button here and upgrade to the new responsive editor. The reason I have to do this is this template was created a little over a year ago, before the new responsive editor was the default editor of the apps that we were creating, and so I needed to upgrade to the new responsive. Now that I've done that, if we pop into the page element itself, you can see Design Primer page element. If we go into the layout is fixed. So I want to talk about what that is compared to align to parent, row, and column. So a fixed layout means that basically what you see is what you get. If I draw a button on the page, it's going to be the same size that I drew it as, and it's going to stay in the same spot that I drew it on. If I copy and paste this button, I can drag it, the new ones, anywhere I want on the page, and they just go where I tell them to go, and they don't argue. And I don't have to fiddle with any settings. I can get exactly what I want. And this would be great if everyone's screen was the same size and I could predict what it would look like on all people's devices. But I can't do that. Some people are going to have wide screens like I have. Some are going to have much bigger ones. Some will have much smaller ones. Some might even be using a phone to view the site. So since I can't predict how big the screen will be that the user is going to be viewing the page on, I need to be able to do more, because right now, if I make this screen smaller, it's adjusting a little bit, but eventually it stops. And now, as I make it smaller, my buttons start to disappear, and that's not really what we want. So the next level of control that we can take over the interface here is we can make our layout of our page to align to parent. When I do that, you'll notice you saw that happen, right? They kind of popped into different places. So what happened was Bubble decided, based on where things were placed already, which of the 9 sections to put each of the buttons. So I'm going to do this one more time, align to parent, and you'll see this one decided to pop into the top left, this one to the top right, this one right dead center, this one center right, this one bottom left, this one bottom center. And so that's what align to parent does. It just means that in relationship to the container or group that the element is in this case the button is in, it's going to pop into place based on its alignment that we say. So because I just took the one here, I'll just undo that. Because I'm taking this button and I'm saying top left, and I already have a button in the top left, it disappears, but it's not really gone. It's there. It's just they're both overlapping each other. All right? And the way that looks on the page is like this. Now we're going to the extreme. Because it is the page happens to be as wide as my screen and as tall as my screen, and so it's popping everything into place according to their relative space to the element. So you can see when I took off the debug mode, I have buttons all the way down at the bottom, I have buttons at the top. If I make my screen smaller, they stay in relationship to each other until they start overlapping and I hit my limit on how small I can make my screen. So this is one of the first approximations to responsiveness, but it is not the best, because I don't want to have to think about just where things are in the center of the page and top, middle, and right of the page. So I want to be able to do more, and that's going to come from our other options of row and column. So if I decide to make the page set to row, you'll see it encountered an error while rendering the elements. So let me go ahead and refresh the page. And now all of my elements are in a row, and this one popped to a second row. So if I made these elements smaller, let's see if I can select them all and make them less wide. Go in the layout, let's make them fixed width but only 100. Then they all fit on the same row together, right? So when I make something a row, everything is going to align side by side next to each other, versus if I make it a column, everything is going to stack top to bottom instead. And so really the rows and columns are where I'm going to hang out. I'm going to be able to look at my page as a grid and decide where things go based on a series of columns and rows. So coming over into our portal layout here, I need to analyze this page and decide the biggest element of which is the page level, whether it should be a column or a row. And if I'm looking at this, I'm taking the widest element on the page is going to be my header, because it's going to span all the way across the entire page. And so if I look at my header and then I look at what else is on the page, it looks like I need to make it a column because I want the header to stack up at the top and everything else to come beneath it. So my choice on the page is I'm going to leave my design primer set to be a column layout. Now I'm going to delete my buttons here because we don't need them right now. Now we've got our column page. Now I'm going to want to put a group on the page that's going to become my header. So if I go back to my portal layout, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, well, it's a group, right? This is a rectangle, so it's going to be a group container, and I have one element on the left and another one on the right. So the type of container that I need to put on the page is going to be a row. So I'm going to just come in here and I'm going to grab a group. And before, when I was drawing the elements on the page, they just stayed the same size and popped right where and stayed right where I left them. But now that it's a column, it's going to pop it up to the top and to the left, right? So I added a group and it went up to the top and the left. I'm going to call this one group header, and I'm going to give it a background color just so we can see it compared to the other elements that we're going to put on the page. And we know that we want to make it a row because we want an element to be here on the left and one here on the right. Now before, when we were working with the row, it stacked everything one right after the other from left to right. But we are actually going to want to put some space between them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want this header to stretch across the entire width of the page. So I'm going to take this fixed width off, and I'm going to put the minimum width, I'll just set it to 0. So this is going to stretch across the entire page, no matter how wide the page gets. Now I want to put an image in for my icon or my logo. So I'm going to draw one here, and it's going to pop all the way to the very left. And it's going to be about the size that I made it, but I can make changes to it. So I'm going to want to make this this group header right now is set to fit height to content or be a minimum of 72. I actually want it to be a minimum of 75, and I want to make it a fixed height. And then for the image itself, I want to make this one, let's go ahead and make this a fixed width of 100 and a fixed height of 65. That doesn't give us too much room. Let's make it a fixed height of 50. Now I want to set this in the middle, and I want it to have some space between the very far left and the image itself. Now the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to come into this group header here, and I want to set some padding. I want to give everything that's in the header some room before they touch the edges. So I'm going to have a left padding of 20 and a right padding of 20. And then the top and the bottom, I'm not going to worry about so much. I'm just going to make sure that the elements are in the center. So I click here onto the image, and you can see now I have a 20 pixel buffer between the image and the left edge of the group. And if I select its vertical alignment to be in the center, it pops right in the center. And that's how I get it exactly where I want it. Now I'm just going to statically upload an image here. I'm going to use this white logo for Pro No Coders. It looks a little bit silly at that this particular aspect ratio. So I'm going to come into my layout of the image here, and I'm not going to make it a fixed width. Let's keep the aspect ratio fixed, and I'm going to change the width here to be 50 and see if it becomes a little bit better, and it does. So that's how I'm going to get my logo to look the way that I want it to look. Now I need to put my profile picture over here on the side. So I'm just going to copy this image and paste, and you'll see the image came right side by side next to each other. But that's not actually what I want. I want one image to be on the left and one image to be on the right. So I'm going to come back into my container, and I'm going to change the alignment of it. And I'm going to put a space between them so that the other picture comes over to the right. And then I'm going to change that picture and I'm going to make it my profile picture instead. And because I have the aspect ratio marked to stay fixed, it went ahead and resized it so that the aspect ratio is what is the aspect ratio of the picture that I fed into it. I could change that if I wanted to, but I don't. I think this is fine. It's what we're looking for. So now back to our portal layout. The next thing that we want to do is we want to add in the rest of this, what comes underneath the header. And it can be tempting to say, oh, I want to put my sidebar in, but actually what we're looking at is a whole new section here that's containing our sidebar and our main group with all of our subgroups inside of it that are centered. And so this is actually the next rectangle that we need to worry about. And it's going to be set up with one group on the left, another group on the right, and that's going to be a row group. So we need to add a row group to our page. So we're going to go in and grab a group, just draw any group on the page there. I'm going to set the layout to be a row. I wanted to stretch the entire width of the page, so I'm going to say not to make it a fixed width, and I'm not going to give it a minimum width. And I also don't want to give it a fixed height. I wanted to have, I want it to be the entire height, other than the header height here. And that's going to give me this the second row in the column, essentially. And I'm going to go ahead and give this, I'm going to call this group main. And then I'm going to give it a flat color so we can see it better. And we'll go ahead and give this sort of a pinkish color, maybe a really light, faint pink. There we go. All right, so now we have we can tell that our main page is a column and our header is a row. And then we have another row that's pretty big down beneath the header. And now we're going to need to add the sidebar to that. So I'm going to come in and grab another group. If I look at the sidebar here, the elements within the sidebar are aligned top to bottom, which means that I really want to put a group on this page that's going to be a column. So I'm going to grab that group here, just transparent group, and I'm going to come to the layout and I'm going to make it a column. And I want the column to stretch from the very top that it can go to all the way down to the bottom. And with the row, the way that I was able to do that was I just didn't make it a fixed height, and I didn't fit it to content, and I just took the minimum height off. But when I do that with a column, you can see it makes the column 0 pixels because it doesn't currently have anything in it. So if I really wanted to stretch the whole way, I have to use this vertical alignment here, and it will stretch the entire height. And so this is group C. I'm going to call this one group sidebar. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to give it a flat color, and we'll just go ahead and make this one a very light blue, like that. And so now I want to put my tabs in, so the text for the tabs. In order to do that, I'm going to grab a text and I'm going to draw it onto the page. Now I don't want it to be right up against the edge or the top edge of our sidebar. I want it to come down a little bit. So I'm going to come into the layout of the text and I'm going to give it a top margin to help move it down the page. So we'll go ahead and make the top margin here. Let's make it 30. I think I want a little more, so I'm going to make it 50. I also want this text to be in the center of the, or at least not right up against the left edge. So I think I want to put next to it I'm going to choose to do this one. I'm going to come into the group sidebar itself, and I'm going to use padding on the left, and we'll go ahead and give it 10. And then I don't want this one to be constrained, so I'm going to go ahead and take off the fixed width and the minimum width. And I want this one to say tab 1. And then I'm going to copy and paste it. I just used Control-C and Control-V. And I don't want there to be 50 pixels between tab 1 and tab 2. So I'm going to come to the layout of the text tab 2. So let's rename this tab 2. Come into the layout and just take that top margin off. But I also don't want these tabs necessarily to be right on top of each other. In this case, it's okay because we've got in our layout here, the minimum height is set to 29, and actually we don't need all 29 pixels, so that's giving it a little bit of a buffer. But if I took this minimum height off of both of these, then I might feel that this was too close together. I want to give them a little bit more room. And so in order to do that, I could put another top margin on this one, but I want it to be spaced evenly with anything else that I might put in here. So I'm actually going to make this adjustment in the container itself in the group sidebar. I'm going to check this box here to apply gap spacing between elements, and I'm going to put a row gap of 5 pixels just to give them a little bit of breathing room. In fact, I think I might just go ahead and double that to 10. And now I don't have to worry. I can just copy and paste, and now my tab 3 is perfect. Now, something you might have noticed when we do this copy and pasting, and you saw me fix some of this in our login page before, is that when I copy and paste, it doesn't necessarily it overrides whatever I named it. So if I just started from scratch with the text on the page, the text D is here, but as I type here, it says text type here, and the two things are tethered together. So it says text to tell me that it's a text element, and then type here is what I typed, and they're kind of synced up together, because if I change this, then the title of the element changes as well. But as you can see, when I made this copy here, it broke the tether. It doesn't say tab 2 even though I changed the text, and it doesn't say tab 3 even though I changed the text. To get things to tether back, you can just highlight the top, backspace, and press enter, and it will reset it and make them synced up again, which is very helpful for cleaning up your elements tree when you're trying to find things. All right, so I have a tab 1 text, a tab 2 text, and a tab 3 text, just like I planned in our wireframe here. So now I want another group on the page, which will go right next to the sidebar, and it will be our container for the other groups that we're going to have. So I'm going to come in here. I'm just going to close this for now. And actually, let's go ahead and preview our page and see what we're looking at. So I'm going to take the debug mode off. And so you can see I have my header at the top. I've got my left sidebar, and I have the rest of this, this row down here that doesn't have anything taking it up. So I'm going to put another group on the page. And this group is also going to be a column. And this one, I don't want it to quite take up the entire page. And the reason I don't want it to take up the entire page is I have a very wide screen. And if I make it take up the whole page, then everything that I'm looking at in it is going to be very wide. And usually for the purposes of reading and displaying information, I'm going to want to contain it a bit. I don't want it to spread out the whole way. So I'm going to take this column group and I'm going to call this group content. And I want it to be, and I did make it a column, which means that I can only center it in the row that is contained, and I can only center it vertically. I can't move it to the middle here. So what I want to do here is I think I want to flip this and make it a row. And that isn't exactly it either. See why I'm not a designer? So I think because this group here is a row, I can't get the alignment that I want exactly. So I'm going to make this group content container. And I'm going to go ahead and leave it as a column. And I'm going to make it not fixed width, which I just told you we were going to do something different, but I changed my mind. So we're going to have it spread the entire way, and we're also going to have it stretch the entire way. And then now we're going to put a subgroup within it that is also going to be a column. And then this one, I only want the width of it to be, let's give it 800 as a max width. So 800 is going to go the max width, and we won't give it a minimum width. So the maximum that it can be is 800, and we want to center it in the other column. So we don't want it to be here to the left. We actually want it to be in the center. So I'm going to take this group content container and I'm going to give it a flat color. I'll just make this one a very light purple, but a different kind of purple color. Then this one is this group in here, this will be our group content. And I'm going to give this one a flat color as well. And we'll make this one a shade of green, like very light green. And actually, we're not going to see the group content container at all. It's going to be in this background. I don't think we're going to see it at all. So what we'll do is we'll take this group container and we'll come back into the layout and we will center it. Well, I guess we'll see the group content container on the margins here. And I want to take this column here and I want to make its height not fit to content, so it will stretch. And I won't give it a minimum height. I'll give it a minimum height for now, just because we're going to need some. Otherwise, if I make it 0, nope, it'll stretch. So that'll work. So now we're going to take this group content and we're going to put our different tab groups inside of it. So my tab group 1, it doesn't really matter if I make it a column or a row, so I'm just going to stick with column for now. I'm going to put it in the middle, but I'm not going to, actually I don't think it'll matter because I'm going to take off the fixed width altogether and make it stretch the entire width of that container. And I will give this group, tab group 1 is the name, and I'm going to give it a flat color. And we'll get this one like a really light red. And then I want to put a text in there so that we can identify that it is the group tab 1. And I want this to be set off a little bit, so I'm going to come to the layout of my group tab 1 and I'm going to put some padding on it. So I'll put 20 at the top and 20 on the left. We'll just do 20 all around. And so that's my group tab 1. Now I'm going to copy and paste it and make this group tab 2. So group tab 2. And I went ahead and changed it. And then this one will be group tab 2. And I'll change this color. We'll just make this a, how about a teal color? And then I will copy and paste one more time, and now I'm going to make group tab 3. And group tab 3. And we'll make this one a, let's make it a little bit different. There we go. So now we've got 3 colors, 3 groups, all matching up with our tabs. And it's looking the way that we intended it in terms of the layout, right? So we've got our header row. So our whole page is a column. The header row is a row. Then our sidebar is a column. And then our main group content container is going to be a column, and within that we have another column that's holding our other column groups. And this is how we kind of get control over where things are going to show up on our page. Now I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to say on these groups, I don't want these to have a fixed height either. And all right, so now they don't have fixed height. Let's see if that takes up, yep, so now they take up the whole space of the whole height of the page together. So now what I want to do is I want to teach you how to make these hide and show based on these button clicks here. So the first thing we have to do is make them not visible on page load and collapse when they're hidden, just like we did with the groups on the login page. And before, what we were doing was we were utilizing the page path in order to show which group we wanted to show. And now I want to use something called a URL parameter. And you've already seen URL parameters as we're working in Bubble, because when I click the preview button, you'll see that we have a parameter here called debug mode. So the anatomy of a URL parameter is it starts with the parameter string starts with a question mark. So it's not considered a page path. And then the first part here is called a key. And then it's separated from the value with an equal sign. So we have the start of the parameter is the very first parameter is a question mark. Then we have a key. Then we have an equal sign and a value. And we can read the parameters of a URL in Bubble for our conditions, and we can set them when we navigate to the page. We can set the parameters as well. Now, when we were talking about page path, so my first page path here is design primer, and we don't have a second page path. When we were talking about page paths, it mattered which order the page path was in order to get the page to do what we wanted it to do. Something interesting about parameters is it doesn't matter which order they're in. You can have pretty much as many of them as you want, and you can mix and change and move them all around, and all we're looking for is the key value pair, so it doesn't matter which order they're in. So coming back in here, in order to start using parameters, I'm going to start with the conditional. I'm going to say for group tab 1, I'm going to get data from the page URL, and it's going to be a parameter, and the parameter name I'm going to say is tab, and I'm going to leave it as text. And then when I say it is 1, then I want this element to be visible. So if I go back to my page and I reset it, and just because I I have a love-hate relationship with debug mode. I'm going to take it off. So now I'm going to add the parameter by hand. I'm going to put a question mark, and I'm going to call it tab equals 1, and now my group tab 1 should show. And you see it not only shows, but it takes up the whole height of its space. So just how I wanted it. And now if I just switch this to 2, it disappears because we haven't told group 2 to show when the tab equals 2. So let's do that now. So we'll come and we'll copy this condition. So I right click in this gray space and copy the condition, pop into the second group and paste the condition and change this last bit to 2 instead. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that for 3 as well. Just pop in here and make this 3. So then when I refresh the page, I can see that group tab 2 is working and group tab 3 is working. So now we just need to make sure that we set which tab we're looking at whenever we're on this page. So just like we did in the login page, on page load, I'm going to click to add an event and go to the page is loaded. And I'm going to say, hey, I want to navigate and go to page. The destination will be the same page. We're on the design primer. And instead of putting data to send here, like we did with the page path, what I'm going to say is I want to send more parameters to the page. Then I'm going to add a parameter, which is going to be a key and value pair. The key will be tab, and the value is not going to be dynamic. I'm going to hard code this, so I'm going to click. I clicked and I erased the click part there. And now I'm click in and I will type 1. And I only want to do this when I go to get the data from the URL, the parameter tab, and when it is empty. Otherwise, we'll end up in an infinite loop. It'll just keep refreshing the page. Right? So now I should be able to click preview, and instead of getting a blank, I should get group tab 1, and I do. Now something to notice here is that I have 2 parameters on the page. Because I clicked the preview, I got the debug mode back here. And you can see that the debug mode parameter is separated from the tab 1 parameter with an ampersand, so the and symbol. And if I want to get rid of the debug mode, then I will take it from the and all the way to the question mark. I will leave the question mark in there, and then I get my tab 1 as expected. Now I want it so that when I click tab 2, tab 3, or tab 1, it goes to the respective tab. And the way we do that is come back in the design, grab tab 1, add a workflow, navigate, go to page, the same page that we're on, send more parameters to the page. The page will be tab, click here, erase the click, and type 1. So when I click text tab 1, I want to go to tab 1. Now I'm going to right click on this workflow, I'm going to copy, and I'm going to paste. And when I do that, I'm able to change the element that is clicked from text tab 1 to text tab 2. And then I'm able to change the tab here from 1 to 2. Then I will paste again. So notice I'm right clicking on the same workflow and just clicking paste, and it adds it for me. So I'm going to change this to text tab 3 and then change this tab to 3. And now if I refresh the page, I start on group tab 1, and then I move to group tab 2 and group tab 3. And this has been my design primer and also my URL parameters primer. So I hope this works out. We're going to now pop into the account page. So now we have essentially what we built from the wireframe here, and it is responsive. It's not maybe perfectly responsive, but it's getting you at least 80% there. I'm just going to minimize this so you can see that if the screen is wide enough, we can see the margins on either side here, and as we drag it smaller, it responds as expected. And then I've been having a little bit of trouble with the inspect here for responsiveness. It's not behaving quite like I'm used to, but it looks like we get responsive down to about 390 pixels, and then it starts to break a little bit, according to this. And that wraps up our design primer. So we're going to just check back in on where we are. So we have done work on controlling the interface showing and hiding elements. We have now worked on paths and also parameters, URL paths and parameters. And we got to learn about our page and group divisions using fixed aligned to parent row and column, going from the big picture to the smaller picture here. So we can go ahead and mark all of this complete as well. So we're going to come back into the account page and work on displaying information next. Moving into the account page, come here and into the design, you can see that we're going to be concerned with the user's profile here. So in our scope for the account, our purpose is this page is for users to view and update their own profile information. Our title is going to be the app name with the pipe character and then accounts. Let's go ahead and add that now. And then back in the scope, our permissions are going to be, in order to stay on the page, a user must be logged in, be active, and have a profile already. So we're going to enforce this from the workflow as we've been doing. So we're going to say when the page is loaded, we're going to navigate the user to the index page, because that's what we send to users who don't belong on a particular page, is we send them to the index to get sorted. And we're only going to send them to the index page if the current user, if they are logged out, or if the current user's inactive is yes, or if the current user's profile is empty, if they don't have one yet. Now, you can see in these drop-downs, I'm referring to the current user a lot. So far in our larger conversation, like overarching conversation about storing and moving data throughout the app, we've talked about the data types. So we know that the current user belongs in the data type of user and represents a row in that data table if they're logged in. And so we have different information that we're storing about them, especially after they sign up, right? Then we've got option sets that we've talked about a little bit, and we've talked about moving information around in the URL through the URL parameters and page paths. I'm going to go ahead and mark these complete. You've kind of seen how these two things work, but some extra conversation around page paths is that in addition to the current user information, we are also able to query our database or find information in our database about the other data types that we're doing. And we want to talk about how to do that and how to display that information back to the user. What we haven't done yet is we haven't used the containers to move information around the app yet. So we've talked about containers a bit. We've talked about how we can make them look the way that we want them to look on the page, from the page element down into our groups. So we've used a lot of groups at this point, and we've even used a pop-up at this point. But we haven't talked about the way that these containers can store information from the database and keep it readily available to use with the user as they're interacting with the app. And that's a huge conversation, so we should go ahead and have it. So on this top level page element called account, if I come down from the page title just a little bit, I can see that there's a type of content here. And I can go ahead and I can select profile, because that's the type of content that we're concerned with on this page. When I did that, I made it so that when I send the user to the account page, I'm going to be required to send in a profile record from the database in order for the page to have access to a profile to pull its information and display its information and edit its information. So what this looks like is in our workflows here, if I go ahead and I create another go-to page and I say to go to the account page, you'll remember when we were going to the login page and other pages, this click here didn't have a red border around it. It was not required that we send information into it. But now that I have created a type of content for the page account, this click here is required. I am required to send in a profile to the account page in order for this not to throw an error up here and tell me that there's a problem. Now, before we were using this data to send, we would just enter some text. We would say this text, and this would create, make it all one word, this would create a page path. But when I select the content type on a page like this, I can't utilize page paths effectively because I have to resolve this to a particular content type's unique ID in order for it to work. I'm going to clear this here and I'll show you what I mean. If I type this text in here, it's going to say, nope, that's not sufficient. We're not going to take it. And I can't just send any kind of dynamic content. If I said current user in here, it's going to be mad at me because the current user is not a profile record in the database and it's expecting a profile. So if I say current user's profile, then it's happy. It says, yep, I was expecting a profile and you're sending in a profile, and that makes me happy. Anthropomorphizing Bubble again, but essentially that's what's happening. It's resolving because I'm sending in the correct data type. Now, at its core, what this is talking about is we've shown you that there are some built-in fields for the different data tables. So on the user, we have this special email field, and then we've got modified and created dates and the slug. For the other tables, we have the creator, which is of type user, that's automatically present on any of the records, then modified, created, date, and slug. What it's not shown here is if we go into our app data and actually open up one of our records, you'll see that there's a unique ID field. So every row of every data table in Bubble gets its own unique identifier, which is this long string of characters, mostly numbers, and then there's this X in the middle of it. And what this is this is the actual text that gets stored in a reference field to another data table record. So when I decide to add a field to a data table and I say it's going to be of type interest, what's actually going to be stored in that field when I add an interest to it is going to be the unique ID of the row in the data table that I want it to be. Now that I have this go-to-page account and sending in the current user's profile, which is per the scope, right? So I've said here, hey, the user can only view their own profile, so that's the current user's profile on this page. What I'm saying is I'm going to put that unique ID into the second page path. So let's just add some only when conditions here, because I don't want to just continuously load the page and keep sending the current user's profile into the page. I only want to do it under certain conditions. First, I want to send it when the current page profile. So this is new. This option was not here before when we hadn't set the data type of the page. Current page wasn't here before. Now it is. So I'm going to say only when the current page profile is empty. But that's not quite enough because the other thing for my scope is it has to be their own profile, the current user's profile. So I'm going to put an or statement here and say the current page profile when it is not the current user's profile. then I'm going to send them to the account page and load their own profile into it. Now, what does this look like when we preview the page? So I'm going to log in as an existing user. And the way I can do that, the shortcut way I can do that without going back to the login page, is come into my All Users section and click Run As next to my the email of the user. So I'm going to click Run As, and it's going to first not have a profile, but then you see it populated the unique ID of my profile. And the reason it did that is because when I loaded the page, the current page profile was empty, and so it sent me back to the same page and it loaded my current user's profile, which is this user's profile. So you'll see this number here, this unique ID, matches the unique ID in the URL here in the first page path. And the reason that page paths, utilizing page paths like we were doing before, where we would send in sign up into the login page, is not compatible with the page having a content type, is because essentially we have to resolve where we would send in the paths, we have to resolve it to a profile. All right, so now that's done, we have access to our current user's profile on the page. So let's go back and look at our scope a little bit more. We can go ahead and check all of these things off. So in our sections, in our header section, to save us time, since we've already done quite a bit of this, we're just going to leave this off for now. We're not going to bother with the header. We're just going to mark it complete. And you can make it look the way that you want to, going according to the scope. And if you have trouble, just let us know. For the profile part, this is identical to what we had on the login page, and the view and activity is only slightly different. If I look at this form, currently it's not showing me any of the existing data that I have in the database for my current user, and that's the first thing that I need to change. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click on this picture uploader, and I'm going to come into where it says dynamic image here, and I want to give it a default value so that it will show me what's already on file in the database. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to click into my dynamic expression builder, and I'm going to click current page profile, and I'm going to choose picture. And now when I refresh the page, it's going to show the profile picture that I already have on file. Now, to make this look a little bit better, I'm going to do some processing of it. And this is just something that I've learned to do. I'm not going to go into detail about why. I'm just going to do what I've been shown to do. I'm going to say processed with ImageX. I'm going to resize to fit the dimensions by cropping. And let's just see what effect that has. That's a little bit better. So that's my profile picture. So now I can still click it and I can select a different picture if I wanted to, but it at least shows me what is already on file, so I would know whether or not I want to change that picture. Now I'm going to do a similar thing for all of the rest of the fields. So for the first name field, in this section called Initial Content, I'm going to pull from the current page profile and the first name. The last name will be the current page profile last name. The date of birth will be initial content will be current page profiles date of birth. Let's see here. Oh, it looks like I might be missing the date of birth field. I guess we didn't store that. So I missed that before. So let's go ahead and go back to our data types and into our profile. And I can see here that I don't have a date of birth field. So I'm going to go ahead and create it. We'll say date of birth, and we're going to make that here a date. And we'll go ahead and create that. And so then in my design, we'll see here, now I should be able to say date of birth and it will resolve. So we're going to take a quick detour and we're going to go back to our login page. And we're going to go into our workflows and we're going to go for the button text save here. And we're going to click add all fields. We're going to delete the interest again. And now we have our date of birth and we'll just pick the date time picker value. So that will fix that going forward. Now we can come back into our account page. And our date of birth is going to be set to what's currently on file, which is what we want. Our bio, the initial content, we're going to insert dynamic data, and we're going to say current page profile, and we're going to say bio. Now I'm going to point out here that it's going to be easy to make the mistake of putting this information into the placeholder. So it's not so easy to do on the picture uploader, but on these inputs, there's a placeholder section and there's an initial content section. And we want to make sure that we're placing the initial content into the data coming from the database in the initial content. The placeholder is really for any empties. So if we have an empty, it's what it's going to place in there. So for my date of birth, since I didn't collect the date of birth when I was creating the profile to begin with, it's not going to have a piece of data from the database to populate. So here I'm going to put a placeholder to show you what I mean. So we'll just say 1/1/1900. Let's see if that will do. So if I refresh this page, you'll see it's saying 1/1/1900 as my placeholder because it's empty, even though I have the initial content set to be the current page profile's date of birth. And the reason it's important to differentiate between your placeholders and your initial content is because you can't use the placeholder to save a value into the database. So if you were putting the data in from into the placeholder instead of into the initial content, when you click save, if you don't have the initial content filled out correctly, it would, and the person doesn't make the change themselves, it would save it as empty, and that's not what we want. So just warning you, if you have problems saving data into your database, check and make sure that your initial content is filled out as opposed to the placeholder. So then the interests here, remember we haven't really set up our interests to save so far. So we're going to come back to that. So I'm just going to make this look like our other one. I think we had Butterflow, Xano, and APIs. And so we'll just leave that for now. We'll come back and refactor it after we get to it in the admin portal. Our company, but we can do this, our default, nope, we can't do it until we say static, so we'll leave it. So our company field, again, this is actually supposed to be a text input and not a drop down. So we will right click and we're going to replace the element type and make this an input. And then we're going to set it to be a standard input style here. And we can say our initial content is going to be the current page profiles company. Our title, and I think we might have missed the title. Nope, we didn't. I think we have it. Our initial content is going to be current page profiles. It's another one that we missed. So we need to go and fix that. So we'll come back into our login, and we'll come into our workflow and save button here. And we'll set another field. So this is another way to create a field. I'm going to put title, and it's going to allow me to create a new field, and we'll make it a text field. And then here, we'll put the input title's value. That will fix it going forward, but we'll end up with another empty in our account page. So coming back to our account, Then for our title, we'll set our initial content to the current page profile's title, which we just added to the database. So our years at company, initial content will be current page profile and then years at company. Our resume, our dynamic link, will insert dynamic data, and it will be current page profile's resume. And for our list of reference letters, the initial files display will be the current page profile's reference letters. And that should do it. This should give us all of the information that we have stored in the database. And we're going to have two empties right now. We're going to have this placeholder here. I actually want to remove the placeholder altogether here, so it'll just show whatever the current date is. And then for the interest, it will be empty because we haven't fixed that yet. And for the title, it will be empty because we were collecting the information, but we weren't storing it to the database before. So it's a good thing that we're going to be able to modify the current user's profile in a moment. So now when I refresh the page, I can see my profile picture that I have on file. I can see my first and last name. My date of birth is wrong. I was not born today, and I wasn't even born yesterday. My bio is here. My interests are empty because we haven't worked that out yet. My company is here. My title is empty because even though I collected the title in the form on the other page, I wasn't storing it to the database. My years at company is present. My profile PDF is here. That's the one that I uploaded before. And the profile and headshot are stand-ins for my reference letters, and they're all present. So that's perfect. So now I need to be able to make changes to this. So you'll notice if I do change my name, let's just choose my daughter's name. So Illy here. I can change this in the input, but if I refresh the page, it's going to go right back to being what is stored in the database. So I need a way for me to be able to click the Save button and save the information as it's entered in this form when it's changed. So I'm going to come back into my editor, and I'm going to click on the Save button, and I'm going to add a workflow. And we've done one thing where we updated a record. We went to data and we went to make changes to a thing. And before we made changes to the current user on the other page, now we're going to make changes to the current page profile. And I'm going to just choose the first name field because that's the one we're concerned with right now. And I'm going to say the input first name's value. So now if I update this page and I change the name to Illy, I come and click Save, and if I refresh the page, it stays Illy. And so if I go into my database, I can see here that my first name was saved as Illy. But you'll notice that my first last is still Tanya Iosa and not Illy Iosa. So I was able to make change to the one field that I said to make changes to. So now we're going to do that with the first name and the last name and the first last and see how that would look. So coming into the workflow, I want to say first last is going to be the input first name value, and then put in my space as I did before and input last name's value. And then the last name would be the last name's value. So now I should be able to change my full name on here. So I can say, hey, it's going to be Illy, and it's going to be Magar, my maiden name. I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And now if I refresh, it stayed. So it's persistent because it was saved to the database, so Illy Magar. And if I go into the record itself, you can see that Illy Magar is in the first last, Magar is in the last, and Illy is in the first. So now my job is to show you other ways of saving this information. So we can update a record based on the click of a button. So the user would have to go through and make all of their changes, but none of them would be saved until they click the save. Or we can use something called auto binding. And auto binding is a fabulous way of making quick changes to the database without taking a lot of time and having like the immediate save happen. So I'm going to, in order to do that, I need to bind the element to its parent group's thing. So we talked about in our page setting the type of content to profile and then making sure that we populate that profile one way or the other in order for this page to work. Now, you'll notice that the parent group of this input is not the page, but rather if I right click on it and I select first parent, it's a group that's called first name G. G standing for group in Michael's naming conventions. So in this group, just like at the page level, I can set a type of content. So I can say, hey, this content is going to be of type profile, and then I can select a data source, and this is just my dynamic dropdown. And in this case, I want it to be the current page profile. Often we'll say we want it to be the parent group's thing, but in this case we haven't set the content type of this group, which is surrounding all of the other groups. So we'll just go ahead and set it to the current page profile. And when I do that, that gives me the ability to enable auto binding on the parent elements thing. So clicking back into the input for the first name, I can select here to enable auto binding on the parent elements thing. When I do that, I get another drop down that asks me, hey, which field do you want to tether this input to? And I can say I want to tether it to the first name field. When I do that, I get a warning because in order to do auto binding, and you might recognize the word, in order to do auto binding, you actually have to go into the privacy rules and give specific permissions to particular users in order to utilize auto binding. So I'm going to come to my data. I'm going to go into my privacy rules and into my profile, and I'm going to look at the owner. Right, so the owner is the one who's making changes to this information. It's not just a logged in user, and it's not an admin user. It's the person whose information it is representing, the record is representing. That's the person we want, or the user that we want to be able to auto bind to this record. So there's this checkbox here that says allow auto binding. I'm going to go ahead and check it. And then it's going to give me the options of all of the different fields that I want the user to be able to utilize auto binding with. And I'm going to check almost all of them. So bio, interests, resume, company, last name, title, date of birth, years at company, first, picture, first, last, first name, and reference letters. So I'm not going to choose owner because they can't really change that anyway. I don't want them to be able to change that. And I think I probably am going to take away the reference letters because I don't think we can do the reference letters anyway. So as auto binding, because it's a list of things, I think we're going to run into a problem there. But the rest should be fine. And if we need to come back and modify it, we can. So now you'll notice the field to modify, I said first name, and I don't have the warning text anymore. Bubble said, okay, well, somebody, at least one type of user, has auto binding permissions. And I do want to draw attention to the fact that when you select auto binding and you select the fields that a particular user can use auto binding with, this is not, I don't consider this a privacy rule. I consider it a privacy permission. And the reason I'm telling you that is because I would say 100% of the time, when someone asks me for an audit of their Bubble app, I will come in and I will see privacy rules applied, and I will go and I will click on it, and the only privacy rules applied are actually privacy permissions for auto binding, and everyone else can still see and do everything else. So if you have an app and you're wondering if it's secure, go and check and make sure there are actual privacy rules and not just privacy permissions for auto binding in your privacy tab in Bubble. All right, coming back to this, now what this means is before, in order to change my name and have it reflect on page refresh, I had to click the save button. But I just changed my name and I didn't click the save button, but let's go with my mom's name here. So I'm going to say Moni, and if you watch the top of my screen, I'm going to click outside of the element here and just watch the top of the screen. You'll see a quick refresh, and that means it was saved to the database via the auto binding. So now I can refresh my screen and it still says Taby even though I didn't click the save button. That's because whatever is entered into this input is going to be automatically saved to the database in the first name field of this profile, the current page profile. Now this auto binding did not take care of the first last. It only took care of the first name. So if I go into my database and I look at my data, I can see that the first name is Taby. It's my sister. But my first last is still stored as Illy instead of as Taby. So I can't do auto binding on the first last because I don't have a field on the page that stores the first last. I only have a first field and input and a last input. So in order to fake the auto binding, I'm going to come into the design here. I'm going to right click on the input and I'm going to start edit the workflow, and I'm going to make changes to a thing, and the thing is going to be the parent group's profile. I could also choose the current page profile. Either one would work in this case. And I'm going to make changes to the first last field, and I'm going to say the input first, names, value, and then my space, and then the input last value. And so now if I come in here and I do Nazi, which is my dad, and I refresh the page and it's stored Nazi, so it's in the database through auto binding, not through the save button. But because of this, what I call a faux auto binding, when I come into my database and I look at this, it stored it correctly in the first last field as well. So another topic, so now we're pretty familiar now with just using the save button to update the record, or we can use auto binding where it makes sense to use auto binding to save to the record. We have a way of faking auto binding if we don't have the particular field, like our first last field, available on the page. The next thing we need to talk about that we didn't talk about on the login page is making fields required. So when I have an input, I have the ability to say this input should not be empty. And this is effectively telling Bubble, hey, when they're filling out this page, I want this field not to be left empty. So now I'm going to take this off for a moment, and we're just going to come to our page, and I'm going to try to empty it. I'm going to try to make it empty. And Bubble says, okay, no worries, you can go ahead and make that empty. And now if I go into my database and I look I can see that I don't have a first name. I have a space, and then I have the last name. And then the first name, it's completely empty. I want to prevent that from happening. So I can utilize this input should not be empty here. And now Bubble won't let me do that. So if I go to type something, now when I refresh the page, it's there, it's present. When I look in my database, it's present in both places. And now if I try to go back to empty, it says, nope, you can't do that. And I click out of the field and it's red. It's saying there's a problem. And if I refresh my data here and open this record, it still has my first name in place that I had before. And in fact, if I refresh my page, it comes back because Bubble won't allow it to be empty. Now, that works for the auto binding. How can we also make it work for the button? So let's take the auto binding off for the moment. So I'm going to take auto binding off, and I'm going to leave that this input should not be empty. And I'm going to take my faux auto binding off as well. Right, so now in order to save the new name here, I need to click the save button. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to refresh the page, and I'm going to make this empty, and it's going to tell me, hey, I don't like that. And I'm going to come to the save button. I'm going to click save, and it's going to scroll up and say, hey, you can't leave this one empty. It said it has to be populated, it has to be filled out. So to refresh the page, and it goes back to normal, and now I can click the save button, and if I had made any changes to anything, it would save those changes in. In fact, probably maybe save the date of birth. Let's see if it did. So date of birth, nope, it still left that empty. All right, so we want to determine which fields are required and cannot be left empty. And I think in the scope, we actually have it that all of them must be filled out. So you can see all of these are required. And so let's just look at doing that right now. So on the last name, we'll say this input should not be left empty. Date of birth, this input should not be left empty. Let's see if it's in here. Yep. In the bio, this input should not be left empty. Interests. I think for this one, I don't think we can say that it has to have anything in here, which is fine because we're not using it anyway, so we'll leave this one alone for now. For the company, this input should not be left empty. The title, this input should not be left empty. Years of company, the same. The resume here, and then for this multi-file uploader, we have the same. It's a little bit different because this multi-file uploader actually isn't a native input element for Bubble. You have to install a plugin in order to use it. And so it's just named a little bit differently. Instead of saying this input should not be left empty, it says this input is mandatory. So we're just going to check that. And then for the button, sometimes we want the button to look different and to let people give people a visual indicator that they can't click the button until they've filled out all of the information. So if I come in here and I refresh the page, it looks like I can click the button, and even when I come down here, even when I leave one empty, the button still looks the same. It looks like I can click it. I click it and it scrolls up and tells me I have a problem. And that's fine if that's working for all of the fields. But if you ever wanted to disable the button based on an empty field, I want to make sure you know how to do that. So I'm going to come into the conditionals on my button. And I'm going to define a condition, and I'm going to say, hey, if my input first name's value is empty, then this element isn't clickable. And now it's very subtle change. If I leave this empty, it gives me the problem, and it just doesn't show me the hand when I hover over the button anymore because it's not clickable. Nothing happens when I click on it. To give it a little bit more pronounced difference, I'm just going to change the background color. And I'm going to make it a super light gray. So if I come in here and I leave my first name empty and I scroll down, it's very apparent that this button is not clickable because it doesn't match any of my clickable buttons. It's grayed out. Right, so to finish our profile page and make sure that we can save all of the information that we want to save, I'm actually going to go ahead and allow Bubbles native scrolling up and showing the fields that still need to be entered to do the job. So I'm not going to worry about this conditional just on the input. I'm just going to remove it here. But let's focus on this save button and make sure that everything gets saved to the database when we click that save button. So I'm going to add all fields and we're going to do the bio. Here is going to be the multi-line input bios value. The company will be the input company's value. Date of birth will be the date time picker's value. The interests we're not concerned with yet. The owner we're not going to change. The picture will be the picture uploader's value. The reference letters, we're just going to click set list and it will be the reference letters value. The resume will be the resume value. Title will be the title value. And the years a company will be the years a company value. And with that, I should be able to fill in my missing fields. So we've got Tanya McGar and put my birth date in. My bio's there. I'm going to leave the interests alone. My title will be founder. Years a company will be 3. Profile, and these I'll leave the same. I'll click save. And now, because I've clicked save, I refreshed the page, my date of birth is there, and my title is there, which means that my page is working. So I want to do one more thing on here just to improve the user experience. First, I'm going to take the debug mode off because it drives me nuts. And so you can see this is what the footer looks like without the debug mode on. And when I click the save button, I actually want to scroll up to the top, which is just a very subtle indicator to the user that the app did something. So I'm going to come here on the save button. I'm going to type scrolls, click to add an action, and type scroll. I'm going to scroll to an element. The element I will say is the page, and the offset pixels will be 0. And so this way, if I make a change to founder and say president instead, I'm going to click save and it's going to take me up to the top. And then when I scroll down, it says president, and that's just the indicator that the information was saved. All right, so just going back to our plans here, we can say that we have made all of these things mandatory and the save button is working. I'm going to go ahead and complete this, and we'll come back and handle the title with everything else. And next up, we're going to head into the admin portal. Heading into the admin portal, we can actually cross a few more things off of our list. So for displaying information, we have now dealt with content types of varying kinds and also singular data. So when we were displaying our data here on our account page, we were actually just displaying data from one row or one record within a data table. And I call that singular data versus the list data that we're going to start covering in the admin portal. And the reason that's an important distinction to make is because a lot of times when our red and blue, if we're not able to resolve a dynamic expression from red to blue, it's because we're trying to display singular information where Bubble's expecting a list or vice versa. And when we're working with lists, we have a couple other things to take into account as we're structuring our data for display to the user. So I'm going to go ahead and cross these off of our list here. And the other thing that we can cross off is we have now used the page element as a vehicle to store information and move it around the app. So when we set our account page to be of type profile, and then whenever we navigate to the account page, so we go to account page and we send in a profile, we're using the page element here to store information that we're going to then pull from to show to the user on the front end as they're interacting with the page. So we can cross that off of our list as well. All right, so with that done, we're going to move on into our admin portal and into the design section. So our admin portal's purpose is for admins to change app-wide settings and manage users and interests in the app. The title is going to be the app name and then pipe and admin portal. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Come in here and call it Who's Who Directory and admin portal. Now the permissions, the only people who can stay on the page are logged in and active app admin users. So if you remember in our workflows, we do this by coming to add an event, and when the page is loaded, we will navigate to the index page only when the current user's logged out. So that means the user has to be logged in to stay on the page. Or if the current user's inactive is yes, then we'll send them to the other page. That means they have to be active to stay on the page. Or if the current user's role is not app admin, then we'll send them away. And so now all of our permissions that we're requiring from our scope are handled. The user has to be logged in, active, and an app admin in order to stay on the page. So we can cross off our permissions here and our purpose here. And just like with the other pages, we'll come back and refactor the title. So moving into our sections, we'll start with the header. And the header is a little bit different than the headers that we've seen on the other pages. So I'm actually going to go ahead and make the changes to this header. So let's go back into our design, and we'll first start with the picture here. So this should be the profile picture of the user, but right now it's just a static image that we have in our image storage. So what I want to do here is I want to go ahead and clear this picture and then insert dynamic data. And we're actually going to pull this picture from the current user's profile. So we're going to say the dynamic image will be the current user's profile's picture. And then we're going to go ahead and click the More button here, and we're going to process with Imgix and resize to fit the dimensions by cropping. Now this is going to assume that the user has a picture, and technically if you go back and you refactor the login page to require the profile picture to be uploaded, then even the app admin will be required to go through the process of creating a profile before being sent to their the admin portal. So hopefully they'll have one. But in the event that they don't have one, or if you were creating an app where you were not requiring the user to add a picture, it's helpful to be able to use a conditional to put in some dummy picture in there instead, just so that it doesn't look weird if there's no picture there at all. We want something there. So I'm going to say here that when the current user's profile's picture is empty, then I'm going to change the image source itself. and I'm going to upload an image. And in this case, I'm going to upload this picture here that I found. So it will show this, this user picture, like user icon instead. All right, so now if I preview this page, first of all, if I preview it, since we haven't created any admins, it should kick me off of the page. So I preview and it says, nope, you're not allowed to be here. So that's right. So what we'll do is we're going to come into our workflow that we created here, and we're going to temporarily disable it so that we can go ahead and work in the page without actually being an admin. All right, so now I can stay on the page, and you can see since I'm logged in as myself, my profile picture here is showing. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to skip our sign up process, and I'm just going to create a new app admin. We'll just put, I can reuse the Tanya Magar at Gmail because my other user is Tanya Magar +2, and I don't have any additional users here. So Tanya Magar at gmail.com. I don't have a profile, and then I will say I'm not inactive, and I'll go ahead and create. Perfect. And now I'm going to turn this workflow back on. So I came back into the workflows, and I'm going to uncheck the disable workflow. And now I'm going to run my admin portal as the new admin that I made. And when I do that, you can see it's showing me this icon that I put in as the default in case the user doesn't have a picture on file. For this home button here, I want this to send the user to the home page. So I'm going to, which we have the home page set that if the user is logged in, they're automatically sent somewhere else. But let's go ahead and we'll navigate them to the home page here. So we'll click on the appearance, we'll add the workflow, and we'll navigate, go to page, and we'll choose the home page. And so if I refresh and I click home, it takes me to the home page, but then it brings me right back into the admin portal because I'm a logged in admin user. All right, next, right here, it's going to say welcome back. Right now it's hard-coded to say Danny, but I actually want this text here to be dynamic and populate the current user's name. So I'll come back into my design and into this text. I'm just going to replace the Danny part here with dynamic data. I'm going to say current users, profiles, first name. Now, I'm currently logged in as a user that doesn't have a profile. So it's just going to say here, this welcome back, and then it's going to be empty. And that looks weird. I don't like that. So just like I did with the picture, using a backup default picture, I want to have a backup or a default way of greeting the user in case I don't have a name on file. Now, technically, we shouldn't have this problem because when an admin is invited, they should be required to create their profile. And if we make all of those fields required, we really wouldn't need to worry about this. So I'm really just demonstrating this because there are times when you're going to face uncertainty about what information you're already going to have on file, and you're going to want to create backups for that. So what I'm going to do here is current user profile's first name, and I'm just going to click in there in the first name part and then click the more button, and I'm going to say is not empty, and then I'm going to click more again, and I'm going to click formatted as text. And what this is going to allow me to do is it's going to give me the option of saying what to do if there is a name on file versus what to do when there's not a name on file. This is like the if-else operators that you can find in coding languages. So formatted as text means that, hey, if the current user's profile's first name is not empty, if that's true, it's not empty, then I want to go ahead and use the current user's profile's first name. And then if not, I want it to say friend. And so now if I refresh the page, instead of saying welcome back empty, it says welcome back friend. And instead of showing an empty, like not showing a picture here at all, it's going to go ahead and show this icon that I put in here. So I think we can go ahead and consider our section header done, our header here done. So we can go ahead and mark this done. Well, technically in the scope, I should have unfurled this. It said it should be hidden, but we've handled it, so we'll just mark it complete. So now we have taken care of our header on the admin portal. We'll look at our sidebars, and we actually have a double sidebar in our admin portal. So you can see for the mobile version, we have icons for navigation, and for the desktop, we actually have both. When we are looking at the desktop, we can see both the icons and they are usable, and also we have the panel. And really these are supposed to match one-to-one in terms of navigation and what's supposed to happen when we click each one. So if I just make my screen a little bit smaller here, you can see that at some point my wide panel disappears off of the page. And actually if I keep going, even my smaller panel disappears. So that brings up a point because we don't have anything for down to the smallest size. There's no navigation here that's allowing for us to come down to this size and then still be able to go to the different sections of the page. And that's okay. Admin portals are not typically meant to be used by someone on a mobile phone. So it's really going to be heavily dependent on the use case and who your client is, or if your client is you, whether you plan to use your admin portal on a mobile phone, as to whether or not you're going to devote the time, energy, and resources and cost to the adventure of making it responsive all the way down to mobile size. So we won't worry about that because we're doing this tutorial on desktop, so we're not going to worry about making the admin portal usable on a mobile phone. So really now what we need to do is we need to hide the groups on the page and show them only when we decide to show them based on these clicks. And for that, we're going to utilize page paths again. So coming into our page, we want to see what happens when we click on this icon. And right now we don't have a workflow, so we're going to add one. So when we click on the icon here, and remember this says branding, so this parent group's text, we go to the parent group, we're going to select parent-child. So I scroll down and select parent-child. In Nav tab 4, the text is branding, and it's all caps. Well, not all caps, it's capitalized. And so if I go to either one of these, they're both going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on this icon and add a workflow. I want to navigate, and I want to go to page, and the page will be the admin portal, and the data that I want to send in is going to be branding with a capital B, or I could say I think it was Nav 4. Hang on. So Nav, well, let's go look. Was this parent group's text? So this first is Nav tab 4. So if I just copy this, and I come in here, and I paste, Now, the reason I'm doing this, it's a little bit convoluted and it seems a little bit like, well, why would you do that? It's because I only want to change, if I decide to call branding app settings instead, in fact, I think I will. So if I decide that I want to call it app settings instead, if I put branding here and I put it on the other button click and I had it as the parent text, then I'd have to change it in 3 different places in order to make that change in the future. Well, I only want to have to change it in one place. So it's better if I set one thing as the source of truth for this particular tab, and that's going to be this first parent, this group here. It's going to be its data source. So I'm going to say branding here, and then I can change it to whatever I want, and it won't matter because everything else will change along with it. So in our workflow, we'll say go to admin portal and use the nav tab 4's text as the second page path for navigation purposes. So coming into the click on the text itself, we'll do the exact same thing. In fact, we can just copy and paste it. So we can right click, copy, and come into the parent group's text and paste, and it will do the same thing. Now, you might notice now I have 2 workflows on the page that have the exact same action. And if I want to change that action in the future, just like I don't want to have to change the name branding in more than one place, if I want to change the action for 2 buttons that have the same action, it would be better if I put that action in the same place, or that workflow in the same place, which I can do. If I come here, I can go to custom and I can create a custom event. And in here, I can say navigate tab. And then I can add a parameter. So here I can click to add a parameter and I can say tab text and make it of type text. Now what this is doing is it's allowing me to use, I can call this custom event from another workflow, and I could pass in the information that I need to pass in, and that way I don't have to keep creating the same workflow over and over for different buttons. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and do my navigate, go to page admin portal, and the data to send is going to be the tab text. Now, and for my button parent group's text clicked here, instead of going to the admin page, the page admin portal, I can go ahead and trigger a custom event. It already knows which one I want, and I can say the nav tab 4's text. And I can do the same thing for this one. I can actually copy and right click paste, and now my custom event will handle doing the rest. So continuing in that vein, we're going to come to this one. We're going to select the parent just to double check that this is nav tab 5, and that's the one that we want for these 2 buttons. So I can add my workflow, I can trigger a custom event, and I can say nav tab 5's text. Then I can copy, come back in and into the icon. I'm going to add the workflow, add an action, custom event, trigger a custom event. Actually, I can just paste what I have on my clipboard. And now back here, right click, select first parent. It's going to be nav tab 6. So we'll go ahead and add our workflow. We can paste what's on our clipboard and we'll just change it to nav tab 6 text instead, and we can copy that, come back into the design, and on our icon, go ahead and paste what's on our clipboard. And then for these last two, we're not navigating anywhere. We're actually just going to log the user out. So here we'll go to account, and the fourth one down is log the user out. And the same for the icon. Log the user out. Now, this brings up a good point, because when we log a user out, we don't want to stay on the same page. Right now, if I log out, even though I'm an admin when I was logged in, once I log out, we don't know who I am anymore. The app will not understand that I'm still an admin. So when I refresh this page and I click the logout button, nothing happens. I stay on the page, and that's not actually what we want to have happen. So as an added part of our security, where we have our permissions on page load, we also need to tell Bubble what to do if the user is logged out while they're on the page, or also what happens if they become inactive while they're on the page. And to do that, we're going to click here to add an event, and we're going to say to do when a condition is true. So this is a new kind of event that we can do in Bubble. We're only going to perform this action when the current user is logged out, or the current user's inactive is yes. And I guess we could also do it, or the current user's role is not app admin. So if for any of these three reasons, the same reasons that we put on the page load to go to index, whenever that happens on the page, because it doesn't just happen on page load, it might happen while they're using the page, then we want to navigate the user away from the page. So I'm going to actually copy this action here and paste it in here. And then I'm going to delete my pages loaded, because this do when action is actually going to be more reliable. And I'm also going to flip this to every time, although it really doesn't matter, because it would only ever happen once, because they wouldn't be navigated away from the page. All right, so now if I refresh the page, I know I'm logged out. So I'm actually going to come here and run as my admin user. And then when I click logout, it's automatically going to send me away to my home page. And I can stay on my home page now because I'm logged out. All right, I think that's all we needed to do for our navigation here. Next up, we'll come back and we'll hide the different groups. So we have all our clicks of our navigation on the admin portal working. However, I noticed right before we move into actually hiding the groups and showing them based on which tab is selected, we're starting to get a mess in our admin portal's workflow tab. So I want to introduce to you some ways of keeping things organized. First, we can rename our elements on the page, or we can rename our workflows so that we can keep this cleaner. It's a little bit difficult to read text and then bracket center FA camera. That's what the text says. So if we right click on the workflow and reveal the element, when it's a click element, it will take us to that element to show us what it is. So we could rename this and say, hey, this is the icon camera, right? And then when we come into our workflow, it says when icon camera is clicked, right? And so that's a lot easier to read than text and center and whatever the name of the icon is. So let's just go ahead and do that. Let's go. So this is the icon home. So we can just say icon home. And then for this one is the icon. This was for app settings. So icon app settings. This one is our logout. So icon logout. This one is users. So icon users. And I think that's it for all of the icons that we have on here. And then we have the button parent groups text is clicked, and then one of these is the nav tab 6 is clicked. So nav tab 6 is fine, actually. I think that's pretty descriptive. We know that this is a navigational tab that's being clicked. These button parent groups text is clicked, and sending them here to nav tab 5. Let's just change this element to nav tab 5. And that will be nav tab 5. And then this one is going to be nav tab 4. So we'll just change this to nav tab 4. And that way there it's consistent with nav tab 6, nav tab, and so forth. And then let's see if there's anything else. This one, let's see what this is, probably the logout one. So we can let's reveal the element, and it's parent groups text, and then let's see what the parent group. So nav tab logout is what we're looking for. So we can just change this to nav tab logout. Here. Phew. So this is a lot easier to read, and it's a lot nicer to work with, and it'll make it way easier when you come back to edit if you're paying attention to details like this. But there are still 2 more things we can do to make it easier. We can make sure that all of our navigational clicks on our sidebars are grouped together. And so every workflow has the option to add it to a workflow folder. And if you don't have one, you can create a new one. So let's create a new folder here and call this sidebar nav. And then for every workflow that is in our sidebar, we can add it to that workflow folder. So this one, and then our navigate tab actually belongs in there as well because it has to do with navigating. So now I think all of the only one that shouldn't be in there is our icon home, is technically not in the sidebar. Okay, now I feel better about the organization of our workflows here. We can go ahead and cross off sidebars from our list. And we can move into our app settings, which this used to say branding. I just changed it a moment ago. So now we're going to change it, and it's going to say app settings, which is going to be consistent with our screenshot that we've had here. And it's going to make use of the tool we developed for ourselves when we named this. All of our workflows, we set it to be based on the parent group's text here. So if I select the first parent, right now it says branding, and I want to change it to say app-settings. The reason I'm putting the dash in there is because this is going to go into the URL, and I don't want to have a space in the URL. So it's better for me to put the dash there or an underscore there instead of a space. Bubba will still handle it okay if I put a space. It would just look a little less desirable because it would include like some numbers and a % sign, and we'd rather just keep it to these characters instead. So now with this renamed, I'm going to go and I'm going to start, I'm going to want to hide the other groups on the page so that I can only show the app settings when the second page path is app settings. So to do that, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to come into our users group. So let me just find this on the elements tree. So these are various tabs. So we've got the tab title for users, we've got the users repeating group, the tab title for interests, the interest repeating group. We've got this button See More here, and we've got our tab for branding, which we're now going to call App Settings. All right, so I want all of these things to be hidden except for my app settings when it is app settings in the URL. Sorry for the trip up there. So let's go ahead. I think the first thing to do is I want to select my tab title container users and my users repeating group. So I'm going to hold down the shift button and click into this group here, because this is the, let's see, I want the repeating group for the users. Let's find it. So navigating inside of on the page sometimes can be a little tricky, because I can't just get to my repeating group directly, because there are other groups within the repeating group that get selected when I click on them. There are some keyboard shortcuts, but I find this select parent child very helpful. So I can select my users repeating group here, and then click shift and click into the users group up here, and now I can see just the two groups here together that I want to group. So now that they're both selected, I'm going to right click and I'm going to group the elements in a column container. I know I want a column container because I want them to be stacked one on top of the other. So we'll go here, group elements, column container. And that's going to put them together with no real division between the two. So if I want to recreate the division that was there before, it looked to be like about 50, it looked to be about 50 pixels between the two groups. So I can apply gap spacing between elements. And I can say the row gap that I want is 50. And that kind of adds that space back between them that was there before. So this group here, I want to title this group users so I can recognize what it is in the future. Now I want to do a similar thing for the repeating group here for interest and also the interest title. So just like I did before, I'm just going to click into this group, and I'm going to find the repeating group using the select parent child. So the interest repeating group, and then I'm going to click on the title group here. I'm going to find the one that I think is going to select everything. I'm going to press shift and click. Now they're both selected. I'm going to right click and I'm going to group the elements in a column container. And again, I'm going to come into the layout. I'm going to apply gap spacing between the elements, and I'm going to make that 50. And then we'll call this group interests. The button See More, I'm not going to be particularly concerned with right now. I think I'm just going to go ahead and hide that on page load and collapse it. And I want to rename this tab app settings group to be consistent with my naming convention up here with group users, group interests, and I'll say here, we'll just call this group app settings. To be clear, Michael's naming conventions that he's using with nav, dash, wrapper, dash, top, and so forth, this is more friendly for indexing and for search engines and for page screen readers, for people who are having trouble seeing the page and they have a device that will read the page to them. But for our purposes, it's often very much easier to just use Bubbles naming conventions. And I do encourage you to familiarize yourself with what's called accessibility for people who need screen readers. But it's a little bit beyond this tutorial. So we'll go ahead and stick with the naming convention of group for users, interests, and app settings. All right, so I'm just going to drag the button See More to below the group app settings. I don't want it in the group, I want it the same level. Yeah, so that's perfect. Group users, interest, and app settings. And actually, I'm going to drag the app settings on top because that's where it is in our menu of things here. And now I'm going to go into each of the groups that we just made, and I'm going to make them not visible on page load and collapsed when hidden. And now for each thing, I need to give it a condition of when it's going to be shown. That's going to be based on the page path that we had, that we set up with our navigational clicks here. So for group app settings, I'm going to make a condition that's going to say when I get data from the page URL, and it's going to be a path segments as list, and it will be text. And when it is, first I have to say which path it is. So item number 2, because it'll be the second page path. So when item number 2 of the page paths is, and this, now I'm going to do nav tab 4's text. So when that's true, because remember this is nav tab 4, for both of these, when I click here, it's going to take the text from the group nav tab 4 and it's going to add it as the second page path. So when I do that, I want to make this element visible. Now I'm going to copy this condition and I'm going to come into my group users and I'm going to paste the condition and I'm going to switch it from nav tab 4 to nav tab 5. Nav tab 5's text. And then the same for interests. I will paste the condition and switch it to nav tab 6's text. Now, if I were to preview the page, I wouldn't expect to see anything on it anymore because I've hidden everything on page load. And I don't say, hey, what do I do if it's empty, if there's not a tab? So I'm going to come in here, and a lot of times we'll put this on a do when the page is loaded. Or we could do it do when. I think I'll go with page is loaded, but you could do a do when. Either one would work here. So when the page is loaded, I want to navigate and go to the admin portal. And I want to send parameters to the page, send more parameters to the page, and the parameter that I want to send in is going to be tab, or nope, actually I'm not sending parameters to the page because I'm using page path. So the data to send here is going to be nav tab 4's text, and this will give me the second page path, and I only want to do this when I go to get the page path. Remember, it's item number 2, and it's empty. That way, if I arrive on the page and I don't know which tab I'm supposed to show, it will tell me. So let's just run as the admin logged in again. And you can see that it's showing me the app settings automatically when I arrive on the page. And if I click on my users section, I go to users. And if I click on interests, I go to interests. So my navigation is set and it works. It should also work on the icons. And it does. All right, now we can start working on our app settings.